The thinking about the origins of this coronavirus was that it's made a jump from animals to humans, likely in a wet market in Wuhan, China, sometime during the fall or the winter. But now there's new research that suggests the virus had moved into humans long before that and has been biding its time. Dr. Robert Garey is a researcher and professor of microbiology, immunology at Tulane University School of Medicine, one of the lead authors of this new study. So, Doctor, take us through some of your findings.
Well, I put together a team of researchers that have been studying the origins of viruses, the evolution of viruses, some of the best scientists in the business. And, we were incentivized by, some of those stories about, the virus originating in a wet market and, and even some of the more obscure stories where, they claim that this virus was a bioweapon somebody created it in a laboratory. You've seen those conspiracy theories on the internet, and they go up to fairly high levels all over the world, actually, speculating on where this virus might have come. So our team, pretty much the experts in the field, looked at the genetic sequences of the virus, the new coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 2, compared it to the coronavirus family, the genomes there, and our conclusion was basically this was not anything that was made by any human in any lab. This is a product of nature.
Okay, so now I guess the next part of that is it's a product of nature, but how old is it? And did it pre-exist before we all learned about it and the original story, the sort of creation story, if you will, that it originated in this wet market in China? Are there indications that perhaps that's not the case?
Most definitely. There were definitely cases of COVID-19 before those cases appeared in that wet market. Now, yes, it's true, a lot of the early cases were linked to the market, but SARS coronavirus 2 came into the market. It did not come out of that market.
So was that the early cases, were those just also in the area, not just linked back to the market?
No,
or does that explain some of what we're seeing? Because I don't want to cut you off, but we have all these accounts, right, of people saying, Did you all have a bad cough or something weird in November, December, January?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not unlikely that some of those cases actually were COVID-19. But earlier cases in China were some of them in the city of Wuhan, some of them in other cities more to the south. I'm not saying that the wet markets are not a breeding ground for some types of infections and things, and we certainly shouldn't probably be eating things like bats that carry a lot of dangerous viruses. But I'm also not telling people what they should and shouldn't eat. So, I'd make the exception with those bats because they carry coronaviruses, a bunch of other deadly viruses like Nipah, rabies. Bats are just an animal species that we probably as a species should avoid eating.
So is there any evidence about how long this virus has actually been circulating in the human population? And if there is, then, of course, I guess the key question is what made it all of a sudden become a pandemic?
Right. So we don't have certain answers for that. What we do know is that the virus looks to be recombinant. And what I mean by that, it's a mixture of a virus that probably at some point was in a bat because the closest coronaviruses to the SARS coronavirus 2 are found in bat species, but they're not that close. So the closest one we found so far is about 96% the same. Now, that sounds kind of close, but to get from that virus to a virus like SARS coronavirus 2 would take many years, maybe even decades of evolution. There is one part of the new coronavirus that is actually very similar to a coronavirus that is found in this animal called the pangolin. Now, that's a scaly anteater, an insectivore, an animal that eats ants and other insects. And it turns out that just one little part of that pangolin coronavirus is actually very similar to the virus that is now spreading through the human race. So what we think is that those two viruses, or a virus like these, mixed together at some point in time and became this SARS coronavirus 2. Now, we don't know exactly when that happened. It could have been years back. It could have even been longer than that. It's just not possible to determine that. until we do, until we find more coronaviruses out there and are able to do more sequencing and the type of evolutionary studies that would pinpoint that exactly. But it was probably years, and it could have been longer than that. This virus does seem to be very well adapted to humans. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't realize that this virus is spreading through the human population very efficiently, and that would seem to suggest that it has been circulating in humans for a while.
So it eventually got our number. Yeah.
Does this knowledge, Doctor, make it easier, more likely to come up with either an effective treatment or treatments or a vaccine?
I think the major importance of the study is that we now know there's a new way that coronaviruses can become very pathogenic and very transmissible in humans, this recombination that I talked about. There have been other pathogenic coronaviruses that have entered the human population. You probably remember the first SARS. We call it SARS-1 or SARS Classic. But that virus, even though it was a pretty deadly virus, only infected about 8,000 people. So it didn't spread very well from person to person. There's another coronavirus that, we still have infecting people from time to time, and that's the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus. That actually turns out to be a virus of camels, and that virus can transfer from people. But again, it doesn't, once it gets into a person, it doesn't make that transfer from human to human very effectively. So those two viruses I just mentioned are what we call direct zoonoses. The SARS coronavirus 2 is a different story. It probably circulated in humans or animals or some mixture of that, like I said, for an undetermined period of time, but perhaps years or maybe even longer.
Quick question, and unfortunately I need a quick answer then. Can this virus be stopped?
We'll stop it eventually. It's those social distancing practices that are going to do this. We've got some new guidance, perhaps, I believe in California about wearing the homemade mask. I think that's not a bad idea. But we need to throw everything we can at this virus, and the testing is probably the most important thing.
Dr. Robert Garey, professor, researcher, Tulane University School of Medicine. Thanks.